can. People say that I found a way to make you say that you love me. Hey, baby, you didn't go for that. It's a natural fact that I wanna come back. Show me where it's at. Baby, I'm so tired of being alone. I'm so tired of on my own. Won't you help me, girl, soon as you can? I guess you know that I love you so, even though you don't want me no more. Hey, hey, hey. I'm crying tears all through the years. I tell you like it is, honey, love me if you will. Hey, baby, I'm tired of being alone here by myself now. I tell you, I'm tired, baby. I'm tired of being all wrapped up late at night in my dreams. Nobody but you, baby. Sometime I wonder if you love me like you say you do. You see, baby, I've been thinking about it, yeah. And I've been wanting to get next to you, baby. You see, sometimes I fool moms, I say, oh, yeah. Oh, baby, hey, needing you has proven to me to be my greatest dream, yeah. Time, baby, yeah. You don't know what I'm talking about. Sometimes late at night I get to wondering about you, baby, and I call your name, baby. I tell you. If I were the sun way up there, I'd go with love most everywhere. I'll be the moon when the sun goes down, just to let you know that I'm still around. That's how strong my love is. Whoa, that's how strong my love is. That's how strong my love is, baby, baby. That's how strong my love is. I'll be the weeping willow, drowning in my tears, and you can go swimming when you were here. And I'll be the rainbow after the tears are gone, wrap you in my colors and keep you warm. That's how strong my love is, darling. That's how strong my love is, baby. That's how strong my love is. Whoa, that's how strong my love is. I'll be the ocean so deep and wide, and catch all the tears whenever you cry. I'll be the breeze after the storm is gone, to dry your eyes and love you on. Oh, oh. That's how strong my love is, baby. That's how strong my love is. That's how strong my love is, darling. That's how strong my love is again. That's how strong my love is, so deep and wide. That's how strong my love is. So much love, there's so much love. Whoa, there's so much love, there's so much love. Anything that's hard to do, I will do it for you. Any kind of love you want. if I do, I would surely lose a lot. 'Cause her love is better than any love I know. It's like thunder, lightning. The way you love me is frightening. I better knock on wood, baby. I'm not superstitious about you, but I can't take no chance. You got me spinning, baby. Baby, I'm in a trance. 'Cause your love is better than any love I know. It's like thunder, lightning. The way you love me is frightening. I better knock on wood, baby. It's no secret that woman is my loving cup. 'Cause she sees to it that I get enough. Just one touch from her, you know it means so much. It's like thunder, lightning. The way you love me is frightening. I better knock on wood, baby. I better knock. Oh yeah, think I better knock on wood. Think I better knock on wood. Think I better knock on wood. Think I better knock. Do you like good music? That sweet soul music. Just long as it's swinging. Oh yeah, oh yeah. We out here on the floor, y'all. Are going to a go-go. Dancing with the music. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Spotlight on Lou Ross, y'all. Oh, don't it look boss, y'all. Singing love to hurting thing, y'all. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Spotlight on Sammy Dave, y'all. Oh, don't it look great, y'all. Singing hold on, I'm coming. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Spotlight on Wilson Pickett now. That wicked, wicked, wicked. Singing Rustin Sally. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Spotlight on Otis Redding now. Singing bam, 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 bam. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Get it, Otis.
Ladies, gentlemen, and Sherlocks, could you please proceed to the main hall? The session is about to start.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Do you like good music? That sweet soul music. Just long as it's swinging. Oh yeah, oh yeah. I got to get the feeling. I got to get the feeling. Do you like good music? and it's sexual healing. Get up, get up, get up, get up. Let's make love tonight. Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. 'Cause you do it right. Baby, I got sick this morning. A sea was storming inside of me. Baby, I think I'm capsizing. The waves are rising and rising. And when I get that feeling, I want sexual healing. Sexual healing is good for me. Makes me feel so fine. It's such a rush. Helps to reveal the mind. And it's good for us. Sexual healing, baby. It's good for me. Sexual healing is something that's good for me. That is good for me. And it's so good to me, my baby. Come take control. Just grab a hold of my body and mind. So we've been making it, honey. Oh, be feeling fine. You're my medicine. Open up and let me in. Darling, you're so great. I can't wait for you to operate. Get up, get up, get up, get up. Let's make love tonight. Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. 'Cause you do it right. I can't wait for you to operate. If you ever change your mind about leaving me behind, baby, bring it to me. Bring your sweet loving. Bring it on home to me. Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah.
I know I laughed when you left, but now I know I only hurt myself. Hey, bring it to me. Bring your sweet loving. Bring it on home to me. Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah.
I'll give you jewelry and money too. That ain't all I'll do for you. Baby, if you bring it to me, bring your sweet loving, bring it all home to me. Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah.
You know I'll always be your slave till I'm buried in my grave. Oh, honey, bring it to me. Bring your sweet loving. Bring it on home to me. Yeah,
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 yeah.
Yeah.
One more thing I tried to treat you right, but you stayed out till night. But I'll forgive you. Bring it to me. Bring your sweet loving. Bring it on home to me. Yeah,
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 brand new bag. And this is crazy to see. It's not too fancy, but it's fine, it's pretty clean. It ain't no drag. Papa's got a brand new bag. Mr. Jack, he's doing the fly. Don't play him cheap, cause you know he ain't shy. He's doing the monkey, the mashed potatoes, jump back Jack, later, alligator. Come here, sister. Papa's in the swing. Get you hip now. But I can dig the new breeze. He ain't no drag. He's got a brand new bag. But Papa, he's doing the jack. Papa, he's doing the jack. He's doing the twist. Just like this. He's doing the back every day and every night. The thing like the boomerang. Hey, come on. Hey, hey, come on. Hey, said you uptight, you out of sight. Come on, see what you know. Come on.
Hold it. Listen. I can turn the gray sky blue.
I can make it rain whenever I wanted to.
I can build a castle from a single grain of sand.
I can make a ship sail on dry land. But my life is incomplete and I'm so blue. 'Cause I can't get next to you. Can't get next to you, baby. Next to you. I just can't get next to you, baby. I can't get next to you. I can fly like a bird in the sky.
I can buy anything that money can buy.
Oh, I can turn a river into a raging fire.
I can live forever without so desire.
On your planet, all these things I can do. But I can't get next to you.
Can't get next to you, baby.
What I do.
Can't get next to you. Yeah. I can turn back the hands of time. You better believe I can. I can make the seasons change just by waving my hand. Oh, I can change anything from home to do. The thing I want to do the most, I'm unable to do. Unhappy am I with all the powers I possess. Lost girl, you're the key to my happiness.
And
Can't get next to you. Girl, you're blowing my mind. 'Cause I can't get. Can't you see these tears I'm crying? I can't get it. Girl, it's you that I need. I gotta get. Can't you see these tears I'm crying? I can't get. I can't get it. I can't get it. Girl, you're blowing my mind.
I've been loving you too long to stop now. want to be free. My love is growing stronger as you become a habit to me. Ooh, I'm loving you too long. I don't want to stop now. Oh. With you, my life has been so wonderful. I can't stop now. And your love is growing cold. My love is growing stronger as our affairs grow old. I've been loving you oh too long to stop now. Oh. Oh, oh, I've been loving you a little too long. I don't want to stop now. Oh, oh, don't make me stop now. Oh, yeah. Please don't make me stop now. I love with all my heart, and I can't stop now. Please, oh, don't make me stop now. Oh, my heart is so
We're like fat. We're yeah.
When a man loves a woman, can't keep his mind on nothing else. He changed the world for the good thing he's found. If she is bad, he can see it. She can do no wrong. Turn his back on his best friend if he put her down. When a man loves a woman, spend his very last dime trying to hold on to what he needs. He give up all his comforts and sleep out in the rain. If she said that's the way it ought to be.
Been here for a while.
Ladies, gentlemen, and Sherlocks, would you please welcome Fred Kemp, President and CEO of the Atlantic Council, to open 360 OS.
So I can see which of you are ladies and gentlemen, but which of you are Sherlocks? Can you all raise your hands? Which are you digital Sherlocks? Well, if you're not this morning, you're going to be by this afternoon. So I'm Fred Kemp. I'm President and CEO of the Atlantic Council. For me, it's just a pleasure to be at the second gathering of this group. But it's even a greater pleasure for me to be in my mother's hometown, Berlin. This is a place that's all about freedom is being divided by lack of freedom, and then it's fighting and sustaining a battle for freedom over time until it finally comes to you. And so it's my pleasure to welcome you to the second annual 360 OS Open Source Summit, organized by the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab. The Digital Forensic Research Lab is one of the most innovative adventures, it's the right slip because it's a venture and it's an adventure. In fact, I would say it is the most innovative venture of the Atlantic Council. Number one, it's designed to identify, expose, and explain disinformation where and when it occurs. A lot of intelligence agencies can gather the kinds of information we can all gather, but they either hoard it for themselves, or they can't really put it out fast enough, or they can't share it. We can actually make a difference. We can put it out in a way and in a manner that it actually can combat disinformation. Number two, we promote objective facts as a foundation of democracy. So first, we identify, expose, and explain disinformation where and when it occurs. Number two, we promote objective facts as a foundation of democracy. And number three, we protect democratic institutions and norms from those who would seek to undermine them in a hyper-connected world. It's fitting then that we hold this year's summit in Berlin, as I said, my mother's birthplace, Pankow, a district of Berlin. This is a city that's suffered division, has known everything from fascism to freedom, knows all too well the danger of disinformation, and then ultimately witnessed the triumph of democracy. So if you'll let me just for a brief moment take you back to Berlin, 1961. The wall had just gone up. It was September after the August 13th building of the wall. That year, Nikita Khrushchev famously called the city the most dangerous place on earth. I wrote a book about that period of time called Berlin 1961, and it tracks all of this. Any of you get extra points if you go into Amazon. But on the evening, actually it wasn't September, on the evening of October 27th, and only a short distance away from here, really just a stroll away from here at Checkpoint Charlie, it's still breathtaking for me as I drive over a piece of pavement as we did on the bus just coming here. And I say to people on the bus, you know, that was the death strip. We just drove over the death strip. And it's just disappeared. You just don't know where things are here. So it's worth getting a tour so you get a feeling of all the history that has taken place here. But on the evening of October 27th, 1961, at Checkpoint Charlie, for the first time in history, American and Soviet tanks and soldiers arrayed against each other, standing only a few yards apart. It would be the first and the last time during the Cold War that US and Soviet tanks were arrayed against each other in that close of proximity. It's a story that's little known. In that moment, the fog of facts easily could have led to a disastrous fog of war. And stories spread of a coming conflict. Not in the way they would have today, a little bit more slowly, telephone calls, in the daily newspaper. A West Berlin radio station reported that General Lucius Clay, he was the hero of the Berlin airlift of 1948, and Kennedy had brought him back to Berlin to instill confidence in Berliners that the US would defend them after the building of the Berlin Wall. A West Berlin radio station reported that General Lucius Clay was going to save the city again. And as a new representative of the United States in Berlin, this time not military, but representing President Kennedy, he was swaggering to the scene of these tanks standing off, Hollywood style, to direct the first shots personally. Another story took hold that a US military police commander in Checkpoint Charlie had started a fist fight with his East German counterpart, and who knows what that might have led to. As the showdown continued, journalists, news photographers, political leaders, spy chiefs, generals, and tourists all swarmed around watching this tank showdown. They were being held back by soldiers. Some people were selling pretzels. In that moment, separating fact from fiction was the difference between war and peace. And believe me, the separation of fact from freedom, from falsehood at that time was a slower process. Those who were reporting got some of the facts wrong, but they worked pretty hard and they took their time in reporting it. There wasn't instantaneous, there wasn't a left-wing blog, a right-wing blog, social networks. Who knows what might have happened at that time had that all been there. I can't say that all those involved struggled for more information on which to predict outcomes and base decisions, but they couldn't move quite so fast in terms of spreading disinformation. We now have much more immediate access to more information than at any point in history, simply at the click of a mouse or a touch of a screen on any tiny device in your hand. That gives us, the international community, a new responsibility, a greater responsibility to harness the opportunity that unparalleled access to information for citizens across the globe created by separating objective, evidence-based information from outright false or overly editorial content. We have to liberate truth from fiction. We have to combat those who seek to exploit this information environment for malicious ends. The outcome of our work is not a foregone conclusion across free and open societies. I remember when everyone was so excited in the early days of the internet, there was no question but this was going to serve democracy. Now it's not so sure. It could, but it may be up to people like us that we ensure it does. Since the close of World War II, we have witnessed an unprecedented period of peace and prosperity, 75 years of it, rooted in an international rules-based order that was constructed on the foundation of shared values of freedom and justice. However, today, the fault lines running through our international community and through democracy itself seem to be deepening. Perhaps it's because freedom, justice, and truth seemed unstoppable that we just stopped defending them as energetically. Perhaps we took for granted a perceived inevitability of government for and by the people. Perhaps we forgot that we, collectively, are the people responsible for a government for and by the people. We are the ones responsible for a government for and by the people. Perhaps we forgot that our common values and open economies are inherently vulnerable to malevolent actors, maybe now more than ever. So now is the moment for action. That's what this gathering is about, to step up and reverse these trends. We face the paradox that our openness is both our greatest strength and our greatest vulnerability. And nowhere is that more obvious than in the digital domain. In the absence of capable instruments and common policies to secure the digital space, enemies of these freedoms have gone on the offense. Both state and non-state actors have used cyber attacks to target critical infrastructure. Spin masters and authoritarian mouthpieces have used social media and the wider web to spread disinformation and hyper-partisan narratives, corrupting our understanding of truth and exacerbating inherent tensions present in free and open societies. Not a lot of you know me. My background is from journalism. I worked for 25 years for the Wall Street Journal, before that for Newsweek. So as I see what's happening in the information space, it's of particular concern to me, also because I saw the Berlin Wall here. I saw the advance of freedom, which was so heartening and encouraging, and now we have to stand up again in a different setting. We have failed to respond to these challenges with the necessary unity and resolve. The efforts of authoritarian governments around the world have been remarkably successful. particularly in exploiting and exacerbating natural divisions in Western open societies. In this battle, we are more vulnerable than closed societies. As citizens increasingly get their information from the web, public opinion has become increasingly polarized. From the US to the UK to Netherlands and New Zealand, the share of citizens who contend that it is essential to live in a democracy has plummeted. Fewer people in these democracies believe it's necessary to be a democracy, especially members of the digitally native millennial generation. Only around 30% of American millennials and around 43% of millennials in Europe believe that it is essential to live in a democracy. Globally, the number of free nations has fallen from 47% to 45% between 2007 and 2017. It might seem like a small fall, but it follows a steep rise over a period of time, which brings us to why we are here today. 360 OS is designed not to simply discuss the vulnerabilities of being more connected than at any point in human history, but to crowdsource the techniques to address them, to foster resilience in our societies from the bottom up. We're building a community of people adapted to the breakthrough of technology in order to cultivate how we defeat disinformation and fake news, document human rights abuses, uncover corruption, get ground truth in conflict zones, and report the actuality of global events in real time. As we started learning these skills ourselves at the Atlantic Council, it struck us that we would never be large enough, we would never be powerful enough to take on malevolent actors. But we could multiply what we're doing by working with others, by working with all of you, to multiply the community of well-meaning actors in journalism and civil society elsewhere that can use these skills to protect the truth and protect democracies. We have the power together to shape the discussion and base it on objective facts, where and when it is happening. The international community has faced down challenges to our values and our freedoms before. Today's challenges come in new forms. They come in different means, thanks to the rapid technological evolutions of our time. And artificial intelligence, quantum computing is not going to make any of this easier. That said, if we come together as we've done in the past, we can address the challenges we face once again. And we can use the same tools that have been used to divide us, the same digital tools that have divided us, we can use them to bring us back together and to uncover and to celebrate the truth. And you're not alone in this effort. Look around you, then imagine looking around you virtually. This is a global network that you can depend upon and that we can continually expand. Not to mention, we're thankful to have the support of statespersons in our audience. I see former Prime Minister Carl Bildt, former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, former National Security Advisor Steve Hadley. You'll pick us out. We're the ones with the ties, Stephen. And we're also involving some of the biggest platforms from the tech world, and we're going to hear from some of the most active leaders in media. They're all working alongside you here in Berlin. So let me take this opportunity, first of all, to thank our partners from the British Foreign and Commonwealth Office and from Facebook, without whose support this important work would not be possible. So thank you so much to Facebook and to the British Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Also, I want to thank each and every one of you in the room here. At the Atlantic Council, I always say it is not and cannot be business as usual. All you have to do is look at whatever your daily means of getting news is, and you know it's not business as usual. We've got to meet this moment and shape it. You gathered in this room are on the front lines, or can be on the front lines of building digital resilience in a hyper-connected world. Our work won't end when you leave this room. That's when it begins. So with that, let's get to work. It's my pleasure to turn over this, I feel like I should be boxing against somebody up here, but it's my pleasure to turn over this stage to Graham Brookie, who runs our DFRL lab, and Elliot Higgins, founder of Bellingcat and DFRL lab, a senior fellow. Thanks very much for being here.
Thank you. So thanks, everybody. Welcome. By 360, we mean that literally, clearly, for the second year in a row. Welcome to Berlin. Welcome to the second annual 360 OS Open Source Summit. I see a lot of faces that we had last year and a lot of new faces. So again, welcome. We're glad that you're here. We're glad that you could make it. We're going to start with a little bit of admin. First and foremost, connect to the Wi-Fi. First step of open source research, connect to the Wi-Fi. Up on the screens right here, you have the Wi-Fi and the password, Sherlock's. We made that one difficult. And now we have the first step of open source research. Next, 360 OS, there's an app for that. If you haven't downloaded the app, download the app right now. If you don't know what your password is for the app, if Michael Sheldon from the DFR lab could stand up. Michael, where are you? He's in the back of the room right here. Michael's our resident Dane at the DFR lab. He can give you your password. And no, we didn't hack it, to be clear. So sign up for the app. Here's a few things that it does. It tells you exactly what is happening. If you're trying to figure out what session is happening next, if you're trying to figure out who is talking at you on stage, if you're trying to participate with exactly what that session is, if you want to ask questions, things like that, again, there's an app for that. Get connected. You can update your profile. I just messaged everybody from the Atlantic Council to upload their picture. And you can explore with each other and connect. You can send messages. It's not encrypted, to be clear. But you can send messages to the people in the room. Get connected. You can exchange business cards because it's 2018. You don't actually have to do paper. There's an app for that. And you contribute to the live news. So this is very much designed to be an interactive setup. This conversation is happening here in the room. It's also happening online. You can ask questions again to people on stage using the app. You can also tweet along with us, post on Facebook using #DigitalSherlocks. Yep, graphics on social media. Okay. So there's an app. And by the way, the venue, check it out. Welcome to the Axica building. The folks that run this building keep saying that this is Frank Gehry's favorite building that he ever designed. I'm here on stage to tell you that I haven't verified that fact. If you guys could do me a favor and help me out with that, that would be huge. But welcome to the Axica building. So the setup, this is the main event space. During breaks, coffee is right where you came in. Definitely be sure to check out the Facebook setup, some of the work that they're doing on election integrity. Stop by and talk to those folks. And welcome to the building. All right, so let's get started. Veni, vidi, verified. We came, we saw, we verified. That's the notion of what we're trying to do here. A little bit about what DFR Lab does. As Fred was saying, we were designed to do 3 things. First and foremost, identify, expose, and explain disinformation. What we do is we put an emphasis on explaining disinformation. Because it's, one thing to identify and expose. That's basic debunking. It's an entirely different thing to explain exactly why a piece of disinformation was effective, how it fit into the entire information ecosystem, and explain kind of the roots of the problem, driving underlying incentives, and explain exactly what's going on. So that's one of the things that we put a massive emphasis on. And the way that we do our work is entirely through open source, meaning any of the sources that we use to either prove or disprove something are available to you on the device that you have in your hands right now. And what that does is it doesn't assume our own credibility. It allows people, it lifts up as much information as humanly possible to your own audience, and it says, okay, don't trust me, don't trust Elliot, decide for yourself. So in this moment where there's lacking trust in institutions and things like that, don't assume your own credibility, and that's the whole point of open source. The second thing that DFR Lab is designed to do is adapt for impact. So we sit at the Atlantic Council in DC, and we don't expect people to come to the Atlantic Council every single day and say, okay, well, good morning, Atlantic Council. What do you have for us today? We're going to come to your website. We're going to click through all of your blogs. Super smart, foreign policy experts. That's really great. What we do is we don't assume people will come to us like that. What we want to do is go actually engage with audiences where they're actually at. Engage with people where they're already engaging. Adapt for impact. Because if we sit back on our heels, on our haunches, we're not going to have any effect. And so, what does this all mean? Elliot and I. As Fred was saying, we're more connected than at any point in human history. So why do we do those two things? Why do we identify, expose, and explain disinformation? Why do we adapt for impact? And the whole point of what we're driving at is what we would call digital resilience. So how do we create resilience in the moment when you have your devices and you're going through content and you're flipping through your phone, you're on your couch, you're on the subway, and you're trying to figure out exactly what is good content, green light, and what is bad content. What is dishonest, what is trying to be manipulative. And the whole point, as Fred was saying, we're more connected than any point in human history. And so how do we create resilience in that moment? And I'm going to turn it over to Elliot here in a minute to explain open source information. But at the same time, like, this is not a new problem. Going back to the Gutenberg press, as you can see on the screens, I'm sure that you could go to a cave in antiquity, and there would be malicious rumors about the next caveman and the next cave over. So this is not a new problem. It's not going away. But what we can do is work together to try to solve it in this moment. So that on our devices, we're not victims of fake news. And with that, I'll turn it over to Elliot. Thank you all again for coming.
So I'm the founder of Bellingcat. I'm also the founding member of the DFR Lab at the Atlantic Council. And when we're doing our work, we've basically broken it down into 3 stages: identify, verify, and amplify. So identifying, that could be anything from finding a single tweet to a whole collection of data gathered from a variety of sources, from social media, from online databases, satellite imagery. We then, once we've identified information, we have to verify it. Verification is the hard part. That's the thing we do every single day, using a huge range of tools and different techniques and ideas, a lot of which we're going to show you today, a lot of which you'll be doing yourself, you'll be pleased to hear, and then amplifying information. So that, again, can be anything from a single tweet saying, hey, look what I found, up to a 100-page report about exactly the kind of work we've been investigating and verifying. So we're going to have some fun whilst we're here today. We've got these table games planned. We're going to get to those shortly. First, Graham's just going to finish off a few bits of business, and then we'll move on to the table games.
All right, so when we leave here after the next 48 hours, the whole point of this is to do 2 things. First and foremost, what we want to do over 2 days of interactive sessions is teach a few more hard skills and strategies to incorporate into your own work. So when you leave here and you're working at your desk, at your laptop, wherever, and you're going through all of this research, you have more strategies, more skills in order to incorporate into that day-to-day work. And then the second point, which is something that Fred was speaking about, is we're creating this digital solidarity movement. And what that actually means is that when you're working on your own research, so if you're looking at the war on drugs in the Philippines, or if you're monitoring elections in Brazil, or if you're looking at chemical weapons in Syria, all of those things are being done by people that are in this room right now. And those skills that you're using in that work are very similar. So the whole point of this is to know that you have a network that has your back. You have a network that is doing similar work. They have similar challenges. Even if the content and the material, the research subject is different, you have people in this room and elsewhere that you can rely on. So after 2 days, hard skills, and more people to help you in your own work. So handing it over to Elliot, thank you very much.
So I've got some bad news for everyone. You're going to have to actually talk to each other today. Throughout the day, today and tomorrow, we've got a series of table games. You've probably all seen the envelope in the middle of your table. That's part of it. This is to give you a chance to actually do some of the things we do at the DFR lab and at Bellingcat. Do kind of mini investigations, test your skills. So we're going to start with the first table game. One thing we do a lot is geolocation. So geolocation is if we have an image or a video, we need to confirm where it is actually taken. We can't just assume it was taken where it claims to be taken. So we combine different information. We use satellite imagery in particular. And the first table game is going to be focused on that. But I'm going to start off by introducing my colleague, Narone from Bellingcat, who's going to give you an example of how we do geolocation.
Everyone, I'm Narine. I work with Bellingcat as a researcher. And because we're going to play a table game, we'd like to show you some examples of how to geolocate areas we need. The first example is from Libya 2011, from when opposition forces declared that they had captured a small town of Tiji and posted the following video as proof. So how can we verify this information and confirm that the video had actually been filmed in Tiji? By analyzing the video and using this technique called geolocation, where the first thing is to find large identifiable landmarks in the area. In this case, it happens to be this mosque on one side of the road. Well, Tiji is a small town, and finding the mosque there wouldn't be too hard. But we can actually make our work easier by trying to find the road that the mosque is located on. And if we look in the video and analyze the road, we could see that it's a two-lane road with a median, and each lane wide enough to fit approximately 2 tanks or large vehicles. And if we get a satellite view of Tiji, of the town, we can zoom in and see there a number of roads in the center of the town, but actually the main road that runs through the town is the only road that has a median and is large enough to fit 2 large vehicles. So the next thing to do is just to move along the road, down the road, and find the mosque, because we know that it's supposed to be there. And so now we have the mosque, we can see the minarets, we can see the dome of the mosque. And to further confirm the location, now we found the road, we found the mosque, and we have an idea that yes, this is the location we are looking for. But how can we confirm it further? Well, we can look for smaller features, like the wall outside the dome, outside the minaret, which we can see both on the satellite image and in the source material that we have. And also the curve of the road. So the idea is to start from larger objects, identifiable, significant landmarks, and to move to smaller features, both visible on the source material and on the satellite imagery to cross-reference and confirm the claim.
So another example is from Syria. What you're about to see here is actually a fairly historic video. This is the first ever video that was published online of a barrel bomb in Syria. Now, you're probably looking at that and thinking, well, someone's pushed over a bin. That does not look like any kind of munition, and Russia Today would agree with you. This article in 2012 called it Barrel Bomb Baloney, saying that the Syrian government would never use such a munition. So by reviewing video footage, we found more and more examples of this use. This video shows a barrel bomb being pushed out of the rear of a helicopter, caught on camera. This next video was filmed inside a helicopter, as the barrel bomb is being lit with a cigarette and pushed out of the rear of a helicopter. The thing is, when you have something like this published online, you have a debate. Is this actually filmed in Syria? Could this be a soundstage in Qatar with Hollywood special effects? All kinds of ideas. So how can we be sure where this was filmed? Well, what we have here is an aerial view of part of the world. And where can we find aerial views of the world? Well, on Google Earth. And if you spend enough time looking at Google Earth, you can find this town in Syria. We can rotate the image, and then we can do a side-by-side comparison of the image and the actual video. And we can see that the buildings are in the same location, the road network is the same, this is the same location. So, as a table game, we've got a challenge for you. We're going to give you, and you've already got on your table, an envelope. There's 7 images, photographs and stills from videos. You can open them now. And there's a selection of satellite imagery. Okay, so what I want you to do, one thing you'll note is there's more satellite imagery than there are actual photographs. So there's red herrings in there. And we want you to match the photographs with the satellite imagery. And then we're going to go through and score you. So you have 7 minutes for this task, starting now. Get around a look.
So it's a matching.
The numbered photographs with the satellite image. And there's red herrings in the satellite image as well. There's more satellite images than photographs. Hey, how you doing? For the 7 minutes, yeah.
For the 7 minutes, yeah? And then
We'll be back on stage and finishing off.
I will open at 30 seconds before, yeah?
Yeah, I'll tell everyone 30 seconds left.
Wait a moment. We fix the mic, so it's better.
Okay, cheers.
30 seconds before that ends, I will open the mics, yeah?
Okay.
You found one already? Oh, good. That's good. Good.
The other guys make it this morning? You were out?
They're all over the place, yeah.
Okay, they're here.
Because Eric's out back with me.
I haven't seen Christian yet this morning.
Yeah, I think Christian's coming a bit late. He had a nightmarish flight. And then Hattie's also going to come about 11 o'clock, so the whole gang will be here.
Alio's not even in town yet.
Yeah.
We're not playing? No? We're not playing? We just said out it. We just told you. You're not listening.
Hey, how you doing?
You're pulling my leg.
Are you at one of the tables?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's what I say. That's what I say.
Good. Hopefully we'll get some answers from this. I think one table over there I saw has got half of them already, so they're obviously the experts, but we'll see.
Awesome job.
Thank you.
Awesome job.
No, it wasn't the things. Did you locate some landmarks?
How you doing?
Sitting in the back of it.
Oh, you are. It would be unfair anyway if you were helping me with this. You'd get them all right away, and then it would just be unfair.
Might be done.
Yeah.
Then it goes too
It'd be cheating.
quick when I'm going to help them.
Yeah, then they'd be sat there for 6 minutes waiting for something to happen. I'll have a wander and see what else everyone else is doing.
Going well? No? Well, we have 3 minutes.
Make you feel good about your capabilities, right? Is your room full of BB5 all of them yet?
Yeah, I was asking if it was going well.
So have you had much luck yet?
I don't think we have pinpointed anything completely so far.
Do it only based on the photos?
Yep. All you need is the photos and the satellite imagery.
Okay, wow.
Yeah, so it's things like the camera lens and stuff like that can affect it. There shouldn't be any horrible ones in here, though. I mean, I've tried to be nice with the ones that are there. But just look at the photograph and imagine what it would look from a top-down view. So, for example, what would that shape of that building look like on a satellite image?
Sounds very logical, but
It's about using your brain to think differently about the images you're looking at. Also, look at where is that shot from? Where's the actual camera position?
diagonally from
It's high up.
high up. Yeah.
So look at all the satellite images you got, and then say which ones have tall buildings, and get rid of all the other ones. So it's a process of elimination you're going through. So how are you doing? Have you got any matches so far?
Not very good. It's a rocket science.
So my advice, think of where the camera is actually positioned. So for example, there's one that's shot from a tall building. See if you've got it in your pile.
Where next? Where
Yeah,
next?
number 6. So look at that and think, okay, you've got a distinctly shaped building there. It's square with a bit sticking out the side. It's shot from an apartment building or some tall structure. So look at all these images where you've got tall structures. And then look at those first.
Oh,
And
yeah,
then
yeah.
look
The black.
for a building that has
For the next-
a very rectangular shape with a bit on the side.
One is- it's going to go on in a minute.
I just want to say,
Okay.
Yeah.
So at least you got one.
They said they would turn it on like when there was 30 seconds left.
when there was,
Oh, hey, how you doing?
30
Good
seconds.
to see you.
and then you'll
So how are you doing? You should be doing well because I trained him at a workshop, so
Oh,
no
yeah,
excuse.
yeah. Okay.
No pressure, but... So have you got any matches so far? Are you still working?
Was it fine?
Oh,
Was I too,
Hey.
Did I look too scared?
I was going to give you a clue. Think about this number 6, for example. That's taken from a tall building. So you're looking for a satellite image with lots of tall buildings in it, just to narrow down what you're searching through.
Hey, everyone.
There you go.
No.
So it's from a tall building, and that's a very distinct shape.
Everyone, you have 30
Oh.
seconds to complete the task.
So, yeah, countdown starting.
Hurry up. You want to win this game.
Who's going to be the winner? There will be points and scoring.
I don't know why.
Okay, 3, 2, 1. Okay, that's it. Put down the pieces of paper. Okay, everyone. Let's see how you all did. So, image number 1. A piece of paper held up in front of an advert. This matches to J. So, who got that? Quick shout. Yeah, hands up. Oh, not many. So the context of that was actually part of an ISIS social media campaign. This was, they asked their followers in Europe if they could take photographs of them holding a piece of paper with the European town they was in. The idea was that they were going to create this atmosphere of fear and terror that ISIS was everywhere in Europe. We actually crowdsourced the geolocation of these pictures on Twitter. Most of these images were geolocated to the exact location in less than 10 minutes, thanks to crowdsourcing. So the headline that was reported in the press was not ISIS is everywhere, they're scary. It's ISIS members in Europe are really stupid because they give away where they live in their photographs.
So the second image matches satellite image B. Did you find that? Good job. Who else?
Yeah?
So, good job. The image shows, it's one of the first images that captured the Buk missile launcher that showed down MH17 on July 17th. To give you some context of the image.
So image number 3, that matches to F. Who got that? Okay. So this is actually a still from footage from the recent chemical attack in Douma in April. We used this video to find the precise impact site of one of the chlorine cylinders that was used in Douma in April. We'll probably be finding out a lot more about this in the next week or so as the OPCW publishes their report.
So image number 4 matches satellite image E. Did you find
You got that? E?
Who got that? No one? So the image shows a hospital building in Afrin, Syria, which was allegedly struck by a Turkish attack. And the Turkish armed forces, they published a drone footage, the following image that we see on the screens, claiming they had not struck the building. But if we further analyze the image and other materials from social media or news websites, we can see that they had actually hit the building next to the large white building, which appeared to be the hospital building, and had suffered damage from the strike.
So here's the damage to the building that was done. Turkey claimed wasn't there. So image number 5. This matches to C. Who got that? Anyone?
Good job.
There you go. So this is actually a Russian aftermath of a Russian airstrike on a hospital, which you can see here. And this, the actual moment of the bombing, was caught on camera. This video was geolocated, and it matches to the exact location of the damage on that hospital building.
Image number 6 matches satellite number K. Has anyone found that? Good job. So this image is from Tbilisi, Georgia, and it shows Georgian security forces storming an apartment building in Tbilisi in an anti-terrorist operation.
So finally, image number 7. That matches to satellite image I. Did anyone get that? There we go. That is from an airstrike on M10 hospital in Aleppo during the siege of Aleppo, which was actually caught on CCTV camera the moment of the airstrike. And we'll be revisiting this example later on. So, by show of hands, which table got all 7? Oh, hey, very good. 6. Okay. Who got
They
none?
might be lying, we wouldn't know.
No, you don't have to show your hands. It's okay. Okay, so we're going to show you more examples of this later on. But now we're going to explore a new topic, the 4 Ds of disinformation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Awesome. Look.
Who feels like a Sherlock already? Are we all Sherlocks yet? We'll get there. We'll get there. My name's Ben Nimmo. I'm a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. I asked to be called Old Chap, but Old Chap is not a thing, so I'm a senior fellow. And I'm one of the founding members of the DFR Lab, like Elliot. I've just got to say, DFR Lab is the best team I have ever worked with, so it's something to be really, really proud of. It's my great pleasure to introduce Liz Wall, who's a journalist, a researcher, and she's a woman who's shown what it really means to stand up for your profession and your principles. So, Liz, welcome to Berlin.
Thank you.
We're going to talk about the 4 Ds of disinformation, which are dismiss, distort, distract, and dismay. You don't need to remember them now. We'll be doing this in more detail. This is a model that we use at DFR Lab to analyze and categorize different pieces of disinformation. And we'll explain how they work, and we're going to give you some examples of this stuff in real life. Just before we go into those, 3 important caveats on the way we use these. First of all, as far as we know, this is not written down in any Russian General Staff manual of information warfare. This is not written down in the online trolls book of trolling. This is a model which we have derived from studying disinformation. So just bear in mind when you see this, this is the way this works. The second point is that the examples we'll be drawing are all from Russia, because frankly, the Russian government has given us so many examples. You could write a few books about this stuff. But these are not just techniques that Russia uses. I've seen China use them in the South China Sea. I've seen them used in both sides during the Brexit debate. And we should never get the 5th D, which is Donald. I've seen a lot of analysis where other people are saying Donald Trump uses the same skills. That's not because, as far as we know, he's learning it from the Russians. These seem to be the standard techniques which malicious actors use to launch their disinformation when they're attacking somebody who has criticized them. So these seem to be the building blocks of disinfo wherever it's coming from. And that feeds the third point, which for us, and certainly for me, is really the most important one. I developed the 4Ds of disinfo as a predictive model. The whole point of these 4Ds is that if you're about to bring out, for example, an analysis of human rights abuses in the Philippines, or if you've got evidence of chemical weapons attacks in Syria, or if you're going to report on election interference in Sweden, you can use these 4Ds to predict the counterattack that you're going to get. This is what they do to us all the time. This is what they will probably do to you. If you know what's coming at you, you can defend against it a lot better. So please feel free, take this model away, use it to predict what's going to come at you the next time you expose something. With that, these are the 4Ds. No, these are not the 4Ds. These are Liz and Ben. This is us. This is us. There we go. Man who knows his own slide deck. This is the first of the 4Ds. Dismiss. If you don't like what your critics say, insult them. Ad hominem attacks. Attack the witness. Discredit the witness. This is the single most common technique, certainly that the Russian propaganda machine uses, and in a lot of other countries as well. There are loads of examples. I'm sure you've all felt them. Who here has been insulted by the Russian propaganda machine already? Show of hands? There we go. There we go. Join the club. We should get T-shirts made. Just a few examples of some of my favorite ones. This warmongering has become good business for them. That was Maria Zakharova of the Russian Foreign Ministry talking about me, and Jonathan Isle, Dr. Jonathan Isle of the Royal United Services Institute, because we did a report to the UK Parliament talking about Russian disinformation. We're profiteers, and we're profiteering from warmongering. Well, if you believe that, why would you read what we do? Okay, it's an attempt to discredit us without looking at the evidence. Shout out to Elliot and all the Bellingcat guys in the room, the infamous investigative group Bellingcat, known for its fakes. That was the Russian Foreign Ministry, in their best diplomatic style. Another piece of McCarthyite hysteria. Go and search for the word McCarthyite on the websites of RT or Sputnik. It's all over the place every time anyone talks about Russian election interference. And of course, there's the word Russophobia. How many people here have been called Russophobes recently? Hands up. Lots of hands up. This is not a coincidence, guys. I did this chart at the beginning of the year. This is mentions of Russophobia by RT, Sputnik, and the Russian Foreign Ministry from 2001 to 2017. Anyone spot the pattern? You'd think Russophobia only came into existence after the annexation of Crimea. Russophobia is the standard term used to dismiss anybody who criticizes the Kremlin. You're not doing it because you believe in democracy or truth or accurate reporting. You're doing it because you're a Russophobe. That's the way the dismiss technique works. And of course, it's not just Russia doing it about Russia. Defending Assad, Russia cries fake news. I'm sure we can think of other political leaders who cry out fake news quite a lot. It's the dismiss technique. If it's fake news, then you don't need to talk about it.
Okay, moving on to the second D there is distort. So if you don't like the facts, you twist them. Distorting a story can range from misleading or to alt-right false fabrications, which Ben is going to get into in a little bit. So if you're going to distort a story, kind of saw this firsthand, you leave out the context. You can cherry pick certain facts or quotes or voices that further the narrative that you want to amplify. You also amplify certain pieces of a story to fit a desired narrative, even though if it doesn't portray the bigger picture. And another thing that Russian media is they're very good at is providing alternative theories. So if the prevailing theory, the one where there's more evidence being gathered behind, if it doesn't fit the Russian narrative, they will very quickly come up with alternative explanations. And a lot of times this comes in the form of conspiracy theories. And for those that are following politics in the United States, we're seeing that the use of conspiracy theories is something that has become moved from the fringe to the mainstream, and it certainly is successful. And unfortunately, we're seeing that populations all are vulnerable to being manipulated by these alternative theories and thinking that they are possibly real representations of reality. So in my experience, the crisis in Ukraine, the beginning of the war in Ukraine was the beginning of when Russian propaganda really took a turn from the worst. Arguably, it could have been seen as once another voice providing another viewpoint. But from my perspective, the crisis in Ukraine is when Russian propaganda became over this Russian television station, maybe providing another point of view, switched to an alt-right, or alt-right in some cases, an outright propaganda machine. It became more heightened, it became more aggressive, and it became more shameless in twisting the facts. So I have a video here that I compiled around the time of Maidan, when right around the ouster of Yanukovych and before the illegal annexation of Crimea. This is what the coverage looked like on a television station like RT.
To protect ethnic Russians, Moscow is considering the possibility of sending troops to the region. What will it take to peacefully settle the crisis? Well,
Ukraine is torn apart by revolution. As Western politicians cheered on Ukraine's Maidan, radical nationalist groups claim power across the country. In Crimea, ethnic Russians are now asking for Moscow's protection. Where is Ukraine's legitimate government? What will it take to restore peace and unity? And what are the chances outside forces will have to step in?
Crimea is on the defensive. Many in this autonomous republic in southern Ukraine, populated mostly by ethnic Russians, fear what happened in Kiev could bury their quiet way of life. But if you want peace, prepare for war.
This is the Crimea. There are two roads connecting the peninsula to the mainland, here and here. This is one of them. Two roads that locals say could become two gateways for undesirable forces from the north. And this is why they're here.
They fear that Ukrainian fascists pose a major threat. The country's ultranationalist right sector group helped topple President Yanukovych.
Yeah, so you can kind of see there the themes that were being pushed by Russian disinformation, the narrative that they wanted to present to the world. Some of it's very subtle. You have to be paying close attention, and unless you're somebody that is very interested in what's going on in Ukraine, or now what's going on in Syria, or how interference is happening in our very own elections in the United States and abroad, it can be very confusing for the average news consumer. But you can see there are some buzzwords that they used. Western politicians are backing the protests. They call radical national groups and fascists are gaining power in the country. So in that way, if you use those kinds of derogatory words to paint the Ukrainian opposition, it provides this, pathway or justification for the need for Russian troops to come in and rescue Ukraine from these fascists. And also ethnic Russians are now asking for Moscow's protection. We all know that that's, in this room, I think that's not exactly what had happened there. And it was more of a Russian military invasion, as some people would say. So those are some of the subtle distortions of the narrative. Ben has more extreme examples where it's not minor distortions here and there, cherry-picking facts, but these are outright manipulations and distortions. Total fakes, as you might call them.
As the fifth D would say. Right, so up on the screen here we have a satellite image which was shared by the Russian Ministry of Defense shortly after the shooting down of MH17. So Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 shot down over Ukraine in July 2014. The latest finding from the international investigation team is that it was shot down using missile provided by the 53rd Air Defense Brigade of the Russian Army from Kursk. So we have a pretty tight definition of where this thing came from. The Russian MOD published this satellite image, which claims to show, in box A there, two Ukrainian Buk missile launchers which happened to be in the site of the shooting down at that time. The Russian narrative being, as it has been for so long, it wasn't us, it was the Ukrainians. Now, thanks to the Bellingcat team, I'm entirely pinching this work from them, suspicions were raised about whether this photo was actually genuine or it was photoshopped. And so Bellingcat shared it with the arms control team at Monterey, whose Twitter handle is Arms Control Wonk, which is a much easier handle to remember than their actual title. And they ran it through a piece of forensic software called Tungsten, which highlights areas where a particular image appears to have been digitally altered. This was the result of the Tungsten scan. So the black patches are where you've had text boxes inserted. The yellow bits around the edges, the bright spots, are where you've had clear digital manipulation. So we're looking for the yellow as bits which appear to have been faked. What do we see in that red circle? The two bits which appear to have been faked the most are the two Ukrainian book launchers. Now, we don't have the evidence to prove that they were just photoshopped in there, but the finding from Arms Control Wonk was that this is so heavily manipulated that it is meaningless as evidence. That's not something from a blog. That's not something from a conspiracy site. That's something from the Russian Ministry of Defense. It looks very strongly like they have photoshopped a satellite image so they can say, wasn't us, it was Ukraine. Fortunately, there are people like Bellingcat and Arms Control Wonk in the world, because when you catch them doing things like that, it doesn't look very good for them. Another example, which is one of my favorites, one we picked up on last year. So in January last year, the US deployed the 3rd Armoured Brigade Combat Team to Europe as part of its European Reassurance Initiative, and it parked enough vehicles for another Armoured Brigade Combat Team in the Netherlands. Now, an Armoured Brigade Combat Team, if you Google it, normally counts about 96 tanks and about 1,800 vehicles. So if you add up all the vehicles that were there, you have about 192 tanks and about 3,600 vehicles. Most of these vehicles are trucks, Humvees, and trailers. Okay? Not particularly dangerous unless they've got a really bad driver. This wasn't a scary enough headline for the Donbass International News Agency, which is a rebel propaganda site in eastern Ukraine. So they just headlined it, US sends 3,600 tanks against Russia. They got the number right, 3,600. It's just that only 192 of those were tanks, and the other 3,408 were other vehicles. It's a clearly distorted headline. It's not the kind of mistake you make by accident. I think most people can tell the difference between a main battle tank and a trailer. So this is clearly a distorted headline which has been distorted to give a sensation of fear. Oh my God, the Americans are coming. What's interesting, given that this is such a second-rate piece of propaganda, is the spread of it. Here you can see, DONI is the Donbass International News Agency. Initially, it spread to the usual suspects, those websites we all know and love, like Russia News Now and Before It's News, the kind of crazy conspiracy fringe of sites. But in the top left there, you'll see that it was picked up by RIA Novosti. That's the Russian state newswire, the sister of Sputnik. And then it was amplified out into the Russian-speaking world and to websites like Viesti LV in Latvia. So you have an entirely farcical story, which has been obviously distorted, but it's still good enough for the Russian state media. And that's something you often see with disinformation. What's important is not just where it starts, but how it spreads. The third D is distraction. If you're accused of something, accuse someone else of the same thing. This is the old Soviet whataboutism. And it's not about trying to have a rational argument, it's about changing the subject. It's about making you defend what you've done rather than actually focusing on what they've done. Russia accuses US of meddling in its elections. I mean, that's partly state-level trolling, but it's also all about changing the subject. Russia accuses the UK and the US of poisoning the spy, Sergei Skripal, to maintain Western unity. This is not a serious accusation. It's about changing the subject. This is a distraction technique. And here's a particular favorite of mine. So the latest report from the MH17, a statement said that it worked solely using images from social networks that have been expertly altered with computer graphic editing tools. The source for that statement, the Russian Ministry of Defense. Pot calling kettle black.
Yeah, and to kind of go along with maybe a recent example in the United States, we have this big immigration debate going on, and it was brought about by the Trump administration implementing this zero tolerance policy. And now there's a lot of outcry with parents being separated from their families. And now it's kind of blame others for what you're being accused of. And he's saying it's the Democrats. And it works because some people are confused, and there's think pieces about, okay, are the Democrats responsible for this? It creates this whole other, distraction in which we have to consider something that is ludicrous or a non-thing. So it's putting chaos and misinformation out there that can muddy the facts of a certain story. And so the fourth D would be dismay. If you don't like what someone else is planning, try to scare them off. This would probably be one of the nastiest of the Ds. It really focuses on intimidation. We have some examples here. Oh, whoops, wrong button. Russia threatens to aim nuclear missiles at Denmark if it joins the NATO shield, so nuclear intimidation there. And the Russian leader makes nuclear threats to Norway for hosting US Marines. So in Russia's point of view, NATO, the EU, they don't like seeing unity there. They don't like seeing these forces being strengthened. So they do whatever they can to scare off any possible progress in these alliances being strengthened. So it can happen on this government level, but I think probably a lot of people in this room have had the experience of being trolled for their point of views, or if you wrote a think piece, or just trying to do an investigation into what it is that Russia really is up to. I think this D of dismay, you can see a lot of it play out online in the digital realm. Here, things like bots and trolls come into play. A lot of times the Russian media and these bots and trolls and these fringe sites will seemingly work together. The level of coordination is unknown, but you do see that the similar narrative is amplified in all these different ways. So, and then it's using very disparaging words. You're neocon is one of them. You're Russophobic. You're a McCarthyite. You're a warmonger. All of these things. And one thing in my experience that I've seen is that they'll use real-world examples in which there's existing grievances. For example, the Iraq War was not popular, so a lot of times they'll shift it from you're a warmonger, just like in the times of the Iraq War. So and so a lot of times it's meant to scare somebody off, to intimidate someone, to silence someone, and to destroy somebody's reputation. So all these things are meant to scare off critics. So these 4 Ds can be used separately or together. One story, of course, that was not very good for Russia was the downing of the MH17 airliner. Overwhelming evidence pointed to the fact that pro-Russian groups were responsible for the downing of the aircraft, of that civilian aircraft. So just some examples here. MH17 report, no clear answers means there's no smoking gun evidence. You'll see that a lot. Even when evidence is mounting, they'll say there is no evidence, show us the proof. And when proof emerges, sometimes they'll come up with their own manipulated examples. The MH17 disaster holds lessons for aviation, Ukrainian authorities, but apparently no lessons for Russia. Here, this headline accuses the investigators of being biased to kind of downplay their credibility. So when the findings do come out, it's unclear whether or not they can be trusted. So you can see some of these Ds in action in various forms here. So ultimately, I think the 4 Ds, the reason why they're effective, and as we've seen play out, let's say in the 2016 presidential election, that there is a very wide audience that is indeed vulnerable to these types of manipulation. The goal there would be to play on emotions. We see this not only in Russian media, but in highly partisan media and on social media, playing to this kind of clickbait emotions that verify your pre-existing beliefs, your existing political beliefs. Also, to insert chaos and confusion, flooding the information space with so many alternative theories, contradictory facts, conspiracy theories that are meant to spread hatred and paranoia, and division. And so at the end of the day, I think one of the biggest goals is to make it so that a responsible party or a guilty party, that they're not held accountable. So those are the 4Ds in a nutshell.
Great. So I talked about the 4Ds as a predictive model, and indeed the main point and the reason I came up with this model is that so all of us who work in this space, we can know what the trolls are going to throw at us when we publish something. So please, 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 if you work in this space and if these are useful, take them away, use them to your heart's content. That's what they're for. There is another use, somewhat less formal, but if you've ever sat through a really, really boring press conference, let's say you've sat through Vladimir Putin's 4-hour direct line with the Russian people, you can use a chart like this one on the screens, and you can play bingo with the 4Ds. You can spot them as they come up. If you're in a meeting with somebody who's using these a lot, you can have it in front of you and just tick them off. The 4Ds can be great fun, and you can actually use them in real time to track the kind of disinformation which is being thrown at you. So if you want to enjoy them for those purposes, then again, be my guest. It's part of what they're there for. That's it for the 4Ds: dismiss, distort, distract, and dismay. As you know, we do have an app. If you have any questions about this, if you'd like to send them to us on the app, that would be great. If anyone has any questions, we are here to take your questions. We are here to inform. So are there any questions from the floor at this point? Or from the app? I can't see much. All I can see is the lights flashing off my own glasses. So if anyone would like to stand up and give us a question? Any questions on the 4Ds? Okay, so we got one on the app. In fact, yep, we got one over here on my left. And could you say who you are, please, just so we know?
My name's Mike Flood from the UK. How does an intelligent man like Lavrov keep a straight face when he's talking about some of this Russian information?
If you'd asked about Putin, I would say it was Botox. Lavrov, I'm really not quite sure. And something which I've seen watching Lavrov over the past 10, 15 years, he looks more and more hangdog all the time. And I suspect on the one level, there's an awareness that as a professional diplomat, this is not the kind of thing you're meant to be doing. But more generally, mind reading the Kremlin is not the kind of business I try and get into. But there is a sense, if you read the Kremlin rhetoric and you accept that they believe even half of it, their point of view seems to be that there's a war already started. They're fighting the war. And once the war's on, all the rules are off. So I suspect that certainly within part of the Kremlin elite, there is this kind of siege mentality. We're already fighting this. One of the really interesting things, if you look through Kremlin propaganda, you'll often see the phrase, they keep on launching colored revolutions. The US is surrounding us with colored revolutions. How many actual colored revolutions have there been? The Rose Revolution was about flowers. The Jasmine Revolution was about flowers. There was only one color revolution that I can remember. That was the Orange Revolution, which was Ukraine way back in 2004, 4-5. Never forget the centrality of that moment in Russian thinking. That was the first time where a country right next door to Russia had a democratic uprising against an unpopular, corrupt, kleptocratic regime. If you're running an unpopular, corrupt, and kleptocratic regime, you're going to get really jumpy about that. So my personal sense is actually a lot of this goes way back kind of 12, 13 years into the past. And there's this fear of democracy as a thing, and democracy being used as a weapon against you. And once you feel you're under attack, then any counterattack is justified. So this is purely my personal suspicion, but I suspect that's part of it. It's that perception of attack and then counterattack. We got a couple of questions on the screen. The first one was, with the prevalence of the 4Ds... Sorry, okay. I would love to hear that one.
I had the great pleasure of sitting in the Security Council with Lavrov for 3 years. We went through various phases because there were times that we were friends with Russia and when we had problems with him. So he actually used all 4 of these. When anything was said that he didn't like, he dismissed it, distorted it, everything. He is actually one of the smartest operators I've ever been involved with. And he is willing to play it round and square. And he has a great sense of humor, but he also knows who he works for, and he's very smart. I do have to tell this one story. I was doing the something for looking at a new strategic concept of NATO, and we were going to the Kremlin, and he by then was the foreign minister. And I think I'm probably known for my pins. And he knew all that, and so we walked in, and he said I had a pin that was really one that was a knot. And so we're standing there, he said, "What does your pin mean?" And I said, "It's our bond." And so then we came to the shiny table in the room, and he said, "I figured it out. It's James Bond." And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, then it's what you think of our pipelines." And I said, "No, it is a knot of friendship given to me by your predecessor." But what he does is find something negative in every aspect of everything. But he does have a terrific sense of humor. So in the middle of all these arguments, he would send me some cartoon with a lot of double entendres in it. So he is very hard to deal with, but he's basically smart in a very destructive way. And by the way, I have to say, I was just looking something up in terms of what you asked, Rusifo. I was accused by Putin of having said that I wanted a piece of Siberia, that had been my intention always to say that Siberia had too many natural resources and that it shouldn't belong to one country. They could never find a quote that said that, and so then all of a sudden there was an article in Kommersant that said, well, they had a mind reader who knew that that's what I thought.
Secretary, thank you very much indeed. So the question is, first question, with the prevalence of the 4Ds, how do we take a proactive approach to countering them in our day-to-day lives from Anonymous? I'm assuming that's not the hacker group. Part of the point of the 4Ds is that they are a predictive model. So if you know that you're going to be coming out with a report, you know you're going to get hit with at least some of the 4Ds. So you can try and spot in advance what's likely to come at you. To some extent, that you can then preempt the arguments. They'll ignore them, and they'll come at you anyway, saying, haha, you ignored X, Y, and Z. But at least at that point, you can say, well, so you didn't read the article then. The other thing is actually just call them out for what they are, particularly with D3, distract. For example, the annexation of Crimea, how many times did we hear the Russians say, well, you did the same thing with Kosovo? You can either say, well, no, we didn't, let's talk about Kosovo. But actually, the best response is to say, we're talking about Crimea here. We're talking about now, not what happened 19 years in the past. And actually, one of the things I get trolled on regularly, one of the many things I get trolled on regularly, is people at RT accusing me of using the 4Ds on them. Because they will turn around. They will try and hit you with the same thing. But that does also show that this works. They really get stung when you say, OK, we see what you're doing there. So the more you can call out the 4Ds and explain to people, this is what's happening, the harder it then gets for the 4Ds to take hold. I think we've got a question over there, unless somebody's sort of waving at me to say hi.
Hi, Ben.
Hey,
this
Maria.
is Maria. Hello. So these are all things that we do as people, right? And it's happening not just with Russian disinformation, but in many, many other countries around the world. In our case, when it comes at you, and it is so organized that it comes at you in exponential ways, in a way that a human being just can't respond to, 90 in an hour. Even if we were just to tag them on every one of the platforms, there aren't enough hours in the day to do it. So what's a tech solution, or how do we come together in a way that will help take this, once you recognize it, and depress it and fight back?
That's a really wonderful question and a really, really pertinent one. And for all of those of us who have been heavily trolled, it's terrifying. The first time it hits you, it just freaks you out completely. And how often do we see the headlines of somebody leaving a particular social media platform because the trolling has got too much? It really does happen. Part of what we can do is support each other more. Part of what we can do, particularly, again, if you know that you've got something coming out in advance which is really going to annoy, for example, the president, and you know you're going to get 100,000 trolls coming in, then actually reach out to people within the community and say, hey, we're publishing this at 0 hour, we're going to get trolled, can you help? There are plenty of people in this room who are troll trackers, who are bot spotters, who have the kind of forensic skills, who can actually take apart a troll attack and say, here's the account which started it, here is patient 0, here are the main amplifiers, here is the way this actually works in practice. If you can reach out to folks like us and all the other experts in the room here, we can actually, we can't stop the trolls, we don't have the button on that, but we can at least make sense of what it feels like a terrifying attack. The single biggest trolling attack that the DFR lab team has had involved a couple of fake troll accounts and about 106,000 bot accounts on Twitter. And we'll be playing a bit with that one tomorrow. It was massive. I had 23,000 notifications in my Twitter feed in 1 hour saying that I was dead. 23,000. To start with, it was absolutely terrifying until we actually ran the analytics on it, and we worked out what words the bots were reacting to. And once you know what they're reacting to, you can write a nice little tweet to Twitter support using those keywords and saying, hey, Twitter support, have some bots. And every single bot retweets that post. And because it's retweeted the post, it's being seen in the Twitter support timeline. We killed 105,000 bots that day. You can do that kind of stuff if you know the people who do it, if you have the experts. So again, one of the things about this whole 360 OS, talk with each other, make the contacts, flag up what you've got coming out, because none of us is an expert in everything. But there are experts in pretty much everything here. So if you know you're going to need the expertise in advance, reach out and ask for the help, because all of us here are here to help. That's the whole point. Do you want to add something?
In terms of how to tackle them on a wide scale, and you're right, it is so massive, and there's so much out there, and that's part of the strategy, is to get so much garbage into the information space that the average news consumer is just overwhelmed, and they give up, they turn off their computer. I know some friends that don't work in news and just, I can't take this, I don't know what's going on. So I think with disinformation, it only works if there is a population, or disinformation propaganda, it only works if there is a population that is manipulated by it. As we've seen, that is a problem, that unfortunately large populations are prone to manipulation. So I think the first step is education, awareness. A lot of it is what we're doing here today. And with that awareness, we're seeing some concessions from the big tech giants like Facebook, like YouTube, like Twitter, that are saying, you know what, we do have a problem. We have a problem with the bots. We have a problem with the disinformation. We have a problem that our platforms are being used by hostile foreign governments and extremists and bad actors. And some steps are being taken to make it so that they're not as effective and prevalent. So it really is a group effort, I think.
Absolutely. We've only got a couple more minutes, so what we'll do, I see we've got, Donara's got a question over there. I think Nika has a question over here, and we've got a couple more on the screen. If we get both questions in now, and then we'll try and wrap everything up. And then we'll have a couple of housekeeping announcements. Okay, so the question from here?
Was that me? Sorry. Meredith Wilson. Sorry, and I believe I asked the same question of you last year, and I am asking it again.
Still waiting for the answer.
What's that?
You're still waiting for the answer.
No. No, last year. So what I'm interested to understand in terms of how this has developed over the course of the year. I've done my own research on this, but I'm interested to know if this is something that you guys are looking at, if some of the tech companies are looking at it. But in what piqued my memory on this was Maria's question back here about, there's one of us and there's 160,000 bots. The fighting fire with fire question. So are there good bots in development? Are there good botnets out there that are fighting back against bad botnets? Part of me thinks it's insane to go down that road, but the other part of me says, how else do you really handle this, particularly when we get into election season and we start to see this just rolling mass of messages that just cannot be fought by individual people, no matter how good they are, no matter how many followers they have. So have you seen in this space, are you starting to see any development in that direction? Or do you have any thoughts about why that would work or not work?
Sure, so good bots, bad bots, and developments. Thank you. Question over here?
Hi, I'm Elliot Stewart. I just want to ask how important you think it is to pair dispelling this misinformation with a an engagement and to proactively convince the Russian government, or just Russians generally, that the US and other Western countries aren't malevolent actors. Because presumably, like Secretary Albright said about Lavrov, he tries to find the worst in everything. And I think a lot of Russians truly believe that the West is out to get them. So how important is just dispelling their misinformation with trying to engage with them to convince them that we're not actually engaged in those plots?
Sure. So we've got dispelling and engagement, we've got good, bad bots and developments, and on the screen, again, how do we engage with actors using these tactics without playing into their narrative? On the development, good bots and bad bots, what I've seen developing over the last year is the techniques have stayed the same, but the technology has changed. So it's still dismiss, distort, distract, dismay. Those seem to be pretty standard right across the temporal span. Particularly since Twitter changed its rules in February this year, the botnets have been shifting. They've been trying to get cleverer to try and avoid the algorithms. But the actual 4D techniques, they're the same as ever. In terms of good bots and bad bots, there are a whole category of good bots, which are things like, weather warning bots, news bots, poetry bots, photography bots. There's a bot called Queen Bot, which only posts photos of Queen, which is amazing. Random, but amazing. But in terms of using large botnets to attack large botnets, don't even go there. Something we have seen time and again, there is no such thing as a good fake, ever, for any reason. If you're going to start running a large network of fake accounts, just do not go there, because all you're doing is handing them your own head on a plate. What we can do is get better at reporting the botnets, and we need the platforms all to get better at actually dealing with them. If I can find by eyeball a network of 75,000 bots which are all sharing a mixture of Russian porn and Jane Austen quotes, which is what I found a couple of weeks back, then Twitter should be able to take them down. Twitter is now doing that. They've hoovered up that botnet, which is a sad loss to English literature. But it's about reporting them and enforcing the terms, getting the platforms to police the terms of service more and more effectively. They need help. They need training. Their AI needs to get better. But do not run your own botnets, ever. In terms of engagement, different audiences. Really, really important to engage our own publics beforehand. Try and teach them these skills. About a month ago, I was in a primary school teaching a bunch of 9-year-olds how to do really basic online safety checks like reverse searching an image. And I was told by their parents for the days afterwards, the parents couldn't get the kids off the computers because they were reverse searching like Donald Trump's image and things. These are skills that you can teach them that they will always have. And so the next time somebody posts something from a fake account with a stolen photo, bing, you've caught them because they know about the stolen photo. So engaging with our audiences and explaining these skills, that's exactly what we're trying to do. In terms of engaging with the Russian audience, you'll be lucky because the guy in the Kremlin and the government in the Kremlin control all the significant media in Russia. Engaging with the Russian government, absolutely. That's what we have diplomacy for. We have to keep on doing that. That has to keep on being done. But it's not so much on our level. I don't think we have a very large following of friendly Russians for the DFR Lab Twitter account, for example. We get quite a lot of unfriendly ones, and we do have the fringe, the real experts, the great journalists in Russia who do this work sort of better than any of us. But in terms of DFR Lab directly engaging with the Russian public, we don't have the greatest following there. So depends what track you're working on. Absolutely, there has to be engagement. You kind of have to talk them back off the ledge. That's what the diplomacy is for. But part of that is being able to say, look, Sergei, we see you. We know what you're doing there. Come down off the ledge. Just talk with us. That has to go two ways, but it's not really the role of digital forensic research. That's it for this session. So I'd like to thank Liz particularly for coming so far to do such a great job. Just one housekeeping announcement. We've told you about the 4Ds. This is the second most important acronym you are going to learn, not acronym, but the second most important abbreviation you'll learn while you're here. The most important one is the 5 Cs. Okay? You all need to know about the 5 Cs, because the 5 Cs are caffeine, conversation, contacts, and chocolate cake. Right now, I am reliably informed that all those things are being provided in the bar out the back. DFR Lab is all about creating a network of international researchers. We can put you in the same room, but we can't get you to network. So please, go forth and network. We'll be back here in half an hour.